When you're working with nested compositions, a very important concept is collapsing transformations. Let's see how this works, and how it relates to continuous rasterization. We'll begin by taking a look at the can layer here. The magnification in the composition panel set to 100%. And here the can looks crisp, clean, no pixelization. Let's pre-compose by pressing Ctrl-Shift-C or Command-Shift-C on macOS, and choose the default of Leave All Attributes in Comp 1. And now we can double-click to go into the containing composition. Now what I'm going to do in here is press S to scale the layer. I'm going to scale it down to 25%. Then come back out to the containing composition, Comp 1. By the way, an easy way to do that is to tap the Shift key, which brings up right under the mouse pointer a little miniature flowchart that you can use. So there, we're back in the containing composition, and the can is scaled down to 25%, as we intended. And here, I'm going to scale the pre-composition layer up to 400%, which should exactly undo the 25% scaling that we did in the nested composition. So 25% is 1/4, and 400% is 4 times. So it's back up to its original size, but it's very pixelated. So what's happening in this case? What's happening is that inside of the nested composition, After Effects is reducing the image down to 1/4 of its size, and then rasterizing that result and calculating the pixels for that result. Then, when we scale that result back up by 400%, we're scaling up those pixels, the ones that were handed off by the scaling operation inside the precomposition. What we'd rather do is have After Effects be smart and see that if something is scaled down by 25% and then scaled up 400%, that those can just cancel out. What we would like it to do is to hold off on doing any of the transformations until the very end of the rendering process. Another way of putting that would be we would like for it to collapse the transformations into one operation. That's why this is called collapsing transformations. So if I click the collapse transformation switch here, notice the can snaps into sharpness because After Effects is doing exactly what we just described. It's holding off on doing any scaling operations until the end of the process. And then, because it's seeing that it really has to do 0 scaling, because it's going down by 1/4 and then up by a factor of 4, we just get the perfect original image. This is very closely related to continuous rasterization, which is done for vector graphics layers, such as this one, which is based on an Illustrator object. I'll zoom back out so we can see it. This is our logo here, which is based on an Illustrator object. I'll use the hand tool. I'll press the spacebar and hold it to get the hand tool, and center that so that when we zoom in with the mouse wheel, we zoom right in. So here, viewed at 100% magnification, this is a nice, crisp, perfect logo. And if we scale this by a really large amount, it still stays perfectly crisp around the edges. That's because it's continuously rasterized, meaning that After Effects is waiting until after the transformations have occurred before it looks inside of the vector graphic to do the computation of what the edges should look like. If we turn off continuous rasterization, then we get a blocky pixelated mess because After Effects is looking at the vectors earlier in the process, computing a bitmap image, and then scaling that bitmap image up. So we'll turn continuous rasterization back on, which tells After Effects to wait until after scaling to then do the calculation on the vectors. I'm going to click the eyeball switch, the visibility switch, to hide the vector graphics layer for a moment. And let's zoom back out a little in the composition panel. And let's concentrate on our can again. So let's go back inside of the can layer to look at this .psd. Let's make it a 3D layer and then rotate it in 3D. And then go back to our containing composition and make the containing composition 3D. So now, if we choose a custom view and rotate around, we can see this can as a 3D layer. If we uncheck collapse transformations, notice what happens. Now we're seeing a flat 2D representation of the can instead of being able to interact with it as a 3D object. We can make that more clear by going back into the can composition and duplicating the layer and moving one of the copies a bit and rotating it. And then going back into the containing composition and seeing here in this custom view, we're not able to see these two 3D layers as individual 3D layers and interact with them as 3D. But if we collapse the transformations, now we have two individual 3D layers, and we can interact with them as 3D. So, if you have 3D layers inside of a nested composition, and you want to be able to interact with them as 3D objects and have them intersect with other 3D items, make sure that you use collapse transformations. So, those are the basics of how collapse transformations and continuous rasterization work. In both cases, you're essentially telling After Effects to hold off on doing transformation operations until the last possible instant, instead of rasterizing something into a flat 2D image that can't be interacted with quite as fully.